Welcome to the Blockchain Startup Show with Harrison Wright, a podcast dedicated to dauntless blockchain leaders building our new decentralized future. You'll hear stories, successes, trials, and tribulations as we channel into the lives of high-performing leaders in crypto and Web3. Whether you're currently a Web3 founder or leader, or you one day aspire to be, you'll gain crucial knowledge and insights to accelerate your learning curve, handle this industry's greatest challenges, and make the impact you've always dreamed of.
Hello everyone, this is Harrison Wright. Welcome to the Blockchain Startup Show. I'm really excited to welcome our special guest today, Tony Drummond. Tony is co-founder of Convert and president of Moonband Consulting. If you hang out a lot on LinkedIn, and I know, hey, it's crypto, so maybe you don't, but if you do, you've probably seen Tony around because he's always dropping great tips on Tokenomics and other things that are really helpful to founders. Tony, it's a real pleasure to have you.
Hey, thanks a lot, Harrison, for having me. I look forward to getting the conversation started today. And, obviously, I'm excited to be here and share some nuggets with the community that's listening in, things that are basically from real pain points that I've experienced running my own project, growing it to over $200 million, 70,000 holders, spending millions marketing and developing this space, but also getting absolutely punished and buried by the bear market and actually coming out of that. So I really, am looking forward to sharing some of these gems for the audience today. So if you're a founder building in Web3, this is definitely the part you'll want to tune in right now and listen to this because we're going to be dropping everything, no holds barred. So look forward to this, my friend.
Same here. Isn't that a rite of passage? Is there such a thing as working in crypto and not getting punished by the bear market? I'd love to see it. It sounds great.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, it's also how I look at this stuff. The best way to learn, obviously, is through mistakes, through failure, and actually through going through some little bit of heartache, let's say. And so, yes, all of us who are mostly around now that actually lived throughout the bear market and didn't convert to AI experts throughout that whole Web3 downtrend, you're actually here today and still building. And you're right. It's sometimes difficult to live through it, but you know what? The people who do, it makes them even better professionals from my standpoint, to be honest with you.
You know what? There's a whole vein of conversation I kind of want to pick up on there, but I don't want to get distracted from the main point. So maybe I'll come back to it later. It's more a note for myself than anything about positioning and knowing who you serve. But there's many things we could talk about. The thing I was really keen to talk to you about is the whole piece around marketing and messaging and getting that foundation right. And I see that a lot of founders in crypto can be naive to these things. Yeah,
and you know what? Well, first of all, there's several components to doing that right, but I'll hone in on one of them, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, is a lot of founders, they don't spend enough time thinking about who they're actually serving with their platform, their ecosystem, whatever the case might be, and actually defining these avatars, specifically giving them imaginary names, building out their pain points, building out their locations, understanding what their interests are, understanding their behaviors. This stuff isn't figured out in advance. And ultimately what we end up with is, hey, we need more marketing. We need more KOLs. We need more influencers. Well, wait a minute. Is the avatar actually following those KOLs, those influencers? This is where ultimately becomes extremely important because, there's a lot of wasted marketing spend in this space, especially. So avatars, I'd love to hear your thought process as well is like, how do you approach that in your own marketing? Because I've seen your ads, obviously on LinkedIn, you're targeting myself, even with your ads. So I know you understand the importance of these avatars and reaching out to the right people. And that's what I personally seen be the most beneficial is if you're going to spend money in marketing, you first want to make sure you're very focused and narrow in exactly who you're marketing to with the right message that is ideally linked to those pain points. Those pain points can only be understood if you actually know the individual or the persona that you're trying to market and reach. So what are your kind of thoughts on this as well?
There's two things I can pick up on here. One is a story and one is a personal view. So in the last bull market around 2021, 22, I had a client and when, the money was flying in, everything was going crazy and they became completely unfocused. They had I'm not going to be too specific about this because I don't want to say who this is for obvious reasons, but they had a very specific narrative and value proposition for their ecosystem. Once the bull market money started, they just started trying to do everything. Hey, let's get people to come and build on our network from Ethereum instead. But why? Well, because we want new users. But they don't fit your value proposition, so they went from this is the thing that we do, and this is the use case that we're solving for, to, hey, let's get everyone on board. And then, then they just became, a lot of their marketing they were starting to do had nothing to do with the technology or the builders. It was just, hey, let's get people to buy the token. And you could see you had this team of, at one point, they were up over 40 people, insanely talented, insanely intelligent people who were just wasting all their time and energy and resources chasing shadows, because 1 minute they'd be doing this, then 5 minutes later they'd change strategy to that. There was no cohesiveness to what they were doing. And I've seen, if you take the time to get that strategy down up front, everything you're doing has a circular benefit within its own ecosystem. You're building and building and building. So, which I guess brings me to the second point. I know this show is about founders of crypto projects, not founders of companies that serve crypto projects. But since you asked, I've done a lot of evolution on our avatar. So I can tell you now, for example, now we've had a few years in business. If I look back at trends, who have our best clients been? Who really gets what we do? Who doesn't get what we do? And what we do tends to be a lot more process driven than is typical in the recruitment space. So what I've come to realize now is, very specifically, our ideal client, they're either a DeFi project or an infrastructure project of various kinds, whether it's layer one or an Oracle or something like that. They're either seed or Series A, or they have a token and they're at the equivalent level of seed and Series A, but they don't need the funding anymore. They have at least $3 million in funding for every year they've been in existence. They're usually not big enough to have an internal talent acquisition department yet. And then a really unusual indicator that I found is they probably have someone on the team who runs operations or strategy, because teams that are organized enough to have that tend to get what we do. Teams that don't have that, or don't plan to have that, or a founder that has a sort of operations mindset, they don't really get what we do. So yeah, I've become highly targeted. So every quarter we'll look at who's received funding in the last quarter, and we'll run a bunch of filters for those things. And that might leave us with 20 teams to focus on. But then I know that when we're talking to those people, the message is going to resonate. And with the ads, like you mentioned, seeing on LinkedIn, yeah, you're probably caught up in our retargeting audience. But generally speaking, within the realms of the targeting you can do on LinkedIn, we try to target them to those two sectors as well. If I look back at the evolution of our business, I look back at, say, end of the last bull market, start of the last bear. I will say we went through some tough times. And one of the things about that is we were working so hard, and I had a team of 4 people here grinding out activity for very minimal results. This year, now I don't have a team of 4 anymore. It's me and one support person, and we're already on track to have the best year ever, with a tiny fraction of the activity that we did 2 or 3 years ago, because we're focusing on doing the right activity for the right people. And now, getting all these systems in, and I'm later this part of this year, my focus is going to be on scaling it up the right way, but with this very niche focus. And I think I don't see any reason why you couldn't apply that lesson to a funded crypto startup as well.
Yeah, you know what? The reason why I wanted you to answer that question, although this is geared towards founders with their projects, is, first of all, when we got on our call, you mentioned this, especially the operations person, but you can tell the thoroughness that Harrison has thought about his audience, his avatar, who he's serving. Now, if you relate that back to a crypto project, let's look at a lending and borrowing protocol, since we're talking about DeFi and what you highlighted. A lending and borrowing protocol, who should they be targeting as people who want to lend and borrow? People who want to use DeFi, people who probably might even understand this at a decently high level, right? People who also have adequate liquidity. So if I'm going to market to a DeFi user, first of all, I have to understand that that's what I want to do. I'm going to walk through this exercise on how I would approach this, just at a high level. First of all, understanding the avatar, figuring out what type of avatar would be a person who would use the DeFi lending and borrowing protocol. That would be step number 1. What are their pain points? What are their challenges? This would also help inform all the messaging I'm going to push out into the market as well. Why? Because that's their pain point. That will catch their attention. Just like if I'm a recruiter, I might highlight the pain points a founder experiences trying to find new staff. That's exactly what my content would be around. Same thing is true in the lending and borrowing side. Now, what I would start to do next when we speak about specifics is I would start to use tools, and there's many of them out there. One of them is called Cookie 3 is one. Another one is called Addressable, and there's a few others out there as well. But what these enable you to do is actually pull the on-chain data of people who are using these given protocols. So for example, I can go into Addressable. I can create a whole list of basically these projects that are DeFi based. And from that, I can actually pull out the actual Twitter profile users or X profile users that are actually using these systems today. It actually links that to their wallet activity. So I'm not sure how it does it, but it has this really smart algorithm that's able to understand not only the wallets that are using this, but the accounts that are using this as well and link that. Now, here's the benefit. I go from a state of having nothing and having this kind of random shotgun approach to my messaging to having my avatar clearly defined, having on-chain activity and liquidity actually drive my audience and being able to export that, but furthermore, being able to use that exported audience as what we're going to call a lookalike audience on X for targeted advertising. Right now, you can see how I've linked that not just to, all right, let me just hire these KOLs or these influencers and bring in anybody. I'm positioning my message in front of the right person with the right message who might even have some money to put into this. And that's exactly who I want. Why is that important? Because so many projects try and do this broad marketing. People are only coming there for pumps and dumps and gains in short term. They're just going to be the ones who will buy and sell. You want actual users. You want people to lock up all that value. So if I'm a lending and borrowing protocol, that's what I want to do. If I'm a meme and I don't work with memes, that's completely different. That's going to be a completely different audience. That's going to be a completely different message. That's going to be more fun. That's going to be more towards entertainment. That's going to be far different. And one other example I'd also link is one of my clients, we're actually building out a learning management system for them. So for their test net. So it's not just a matter of marketing to the right person, but now showing and teaching them how to use this specific new system. So that way they can get into it and feel comfortable on testnet. When mainnet comes live, then it's going to be higher likelihood people will actually come in and use that actual system. And that's how I wanted to link it to not just saying you need to map out your avatars, but actually pulling out that entire process and spelling that whole thing out so they can see that there's actually multiple steps involved to be this targeted, and actually when you do that, the benefit is if I'm doing things in this strategic manner, I can now also actually manage and measure my results. Right now I can have something, what we're going to call attribution. I know that if I ran this ad, I can see the benefit of this ad and my conversions into that if I send them to a landing page, right? But typically most people are like, let me just hire these random KOLs, these influencers, and they don't know what worked, what didn't work. It's all speculation. Or let me go on this centralized exchange. Well, why am I on the centralized exchange? So they can market for me and I'll bring in new buyers that way. Well, after the initial pump and dump, then the whole post on the centralized exchange gets dumped down. Nobody sees it anymore. And you just wasted 30, 40 grand in listing fees plus market maker fees every month. That's a waste. So it's like, these are the things that strategically we can start thinking about as project founders that will enable us to have these measurable results and actually manage our spend effectively. Because like what you mentioned, I've also been in that bucket where I've been marketing and spending and spending and spending and spending. And wasn't long before I realized we had blown a couple $100,000 on something that wasn't working. And the reason for that was we overdid it. And we had something called diminishing returns, where we're in front of the same people, the same audience over and over and over again. And it makes logical sense that then results would start to decline. A certain group of people would have already converted if they were going to convert. And we kept marketing to them. And that was waste. We should have found a new audience, a new channel, a new way to get in front of new people. That would have helped us drive even more results. So sorry if I'm a little long-winded. I just want to explain something very detailed for people that they can then use.
No, I think it's a really great explanation. And it brings to mind something else, which is that I think if you look at how marketing has evolved, before the internet and after the internet is a very different discipline. One of the upsides of internet marketing is everything becomes measurable. But that is a very significant downside as well, because it means people only tend to do the things that are measurable. And when they measure the wrong things, it leads to disaster. And the biggest example I can think of that is people that obsess about lead generation. I think they're completely missing the point. Okay, someone filled in a form and said, or in a B2C context, okay, that you get a new wallet address. Okay, what does that mean? Maybe nothing. Maybe they just try it out and leave again. Is that someone you want? Is that an outcome that is desirable for you? And I think a lot of if I distill what you're saying and what I've observed, a lot of the downfalls here come from seeing things in terms of isolated events and not interconnected systems.
Yes, it's the outlier events that people say, well, so-and-so did this and it worked. Well, guess what? There's always outliers. In any given population, there exists an outlier, right? That, and you know what we do in inferential statistics? We eliminate the outlier because it actually skews the data. You know what I mean? So instead, we're pointing to the outliers saying, well, CryptoPunks, they were able to post out an NFT, have an NFT project, and they were able to do all this. That's why we can do it. Well, wait a minute, they're an outlier. There's always outliers you could point to, but you're more likely to become part of the average population in this case. And I really liked what you hit on here regarding the leads and the acquisition. And I want to bring up an example from, just other people to learn from as well. I had a client that's starting their initial minimum viable community. They're looking to build that base of people into the Discord, into the Telegram, and they also have a live beta. Okay. Now here's the challenge. They actually started doing a lot of giveaways and things of this nature to bring in the initial base of users. That's part of this. Okay. Now you can get people in, you can start to build a base, but you're not going to want to build your whole community off of that. So they spent some money doing that. But here's the challenge. The people that were brought in weren't actual people who wanted to use the actual system. And so you end up with a community of about 700 people, but the users was actually around 10. Now, if you do the math of the conversions, like you said, the leads, it could look like, wow, we're crushing it. We built a great community. Unfortunately, no one in there, wants to use the actual system. They're there to make money off of giveaways. That's why they're there, right? And so instead, it would have been smarter in that case for that particular client to look at what network they were on. I'm not going to mention the network, just I want to identify them, right? But to look at the network that they're on, which had a very small amount of volume on the decentralized exchange as you look at overall broader marketing spend. So if we're on, let's say, a decentralized exchange that doesn't have lots of volume because the blockchain we're on, let's say it's Arbitrum. That's not the case in this one, but it's lower volume. Well, now I have to focus on users who are on Arbitrum. That's going to be really important, right? Because I don't want to have the friction of marketing and having people set up a whole wallet with Arbitrum and everything else. It'd be smarter to target users that are already on Arbitrum today to reduce that friction. And so when we speak about leads and acquisition, and it all leads back to the avatars and our targeting, this is another example that I want to highlight too, is it's also about what blockchain they might even be using today when it comes to those leads and that acquisition. We get a bunch of leads in that are on ETH primarily, and now I have to convince them to get into something in Bitcoin or whatever. Now that might be even harder. If I have to convince them to get in something in Optimism, that might be even harder. That's not what we want to do. Instead, we want to find people who are on Optimism today to build that initial community off of. Why? Because when the platform goes out as its base beta level, the likelihood of people using it should be significantly higher. That's essentially how I look at this stuff as well. Is oftentimes there's a lot of vanity metrics like how big our community is, but when you actually look on chain, there's no users. Users is what you should manage. So like you mentioned, it's a matter of measuring the right metric as well. The one that creates value is what we should think about measuring. Like if I'm bringing in leads, but I don't get any actual conversions or customers, doesn't matter how many leads I have in. You're wasting your time meeting with people who aren't qualified. Right? It's the same exact thing here.
John reminds me of, this is going to sound really random, but one of my first jobs way back, this feels like so long ago now, but I used to do appointment setting for a Xerox distributor. And I remember one time, and it was a really thankless job, right? The field sales guys, they got all the money and we did all the hard work. That's basically how that system was set up. And we got paid per appointment. We didn't get anything on a revenue. And then they brought out this promotion, the company, hey, color printing for the price of black and white, which if you know anything, that probably doesn't mean anything to you if you don't know anything about the Xerox industry, but that's a huge thing. So normally I think you get them on a lease and then you pay per copy rather than buying the machine.
It's called a click. It's actually by the color that's used. It's called a click.
Yeah. And I can't, it's so long ago now, but I think the price is something like, it's 0.1 cents for a black and white copy and about 5 cents for a color copy. Who is this most interesting to? Print shops that do lots of color printing. So what did I do as soon as they released that promotion? Of course, I caught up all the print shops and I just effortlessly booked endless appointments with print shops. And then the sales guys started turning around and canceling the appointments and complaining, well, we can't sell this to print shops. Well, it's not my problem, is it? I get paid by the appointment. Create a better incentive structure. And I thought I'd bring that up because it's a classic case of it looking like a win, but it actually being a loss because the incentive structure doesn't make any sense and what's being measured is wrong.
Yeah. Like a print shop probably couldn't do anything with that small format size. You'd have to print out so many copies. It'd be ridiculous, right? You have to have the smaller format equipment to convert all that. And as a side note, Xerox has something called the iGen, and that's exactly why that was created, for printers.
Yeah.
We talked before about my background in printing. It's something that I personally am very passionate about, but yeah, I mean, I could see what you're mentioning there. And it's like exactly what you said. It's the giveaway. You bring in the wrong people, they're not going to buy it. It's a complete waste of time and money and energy and effort, and it's also not really measuring the right metric. Like you can have the most appointments booked, but if no printers can buy it, then what's the point of that?
Here's a question for you. When is the, and I'm thinking here of all the founders in the space that are predominantly technical and are picking up the business stuff later. When do you think is the right time to start thinking about this stuff in the life cycle of a crypto startup?
Well, I would say probably as soon as possible and I get it because I'm a technical guy too. I love technology and stuff, but the part about technology too is you want to, first of all, I think you have to identify who your avatars or users are, what their pain points are, and what you can solve, right? I feel like this is still an important upfront step in the process, right? Like you don't want to build a platform that has so many features that aren't really solving the most important problems for the people. So what I would look at in the beginning is, all right, what's my value and ease of completion? Something that's very easy to do that creates a lot of high value. I should do those right away. And I would start to use this prioritization matrix, if you will, to actually understand my users and understand my MVP. What's the minimum viable thing we can do? And that might even get you by with something like a fork of something existing. A buddy of mine does that for clients right now is he tries to help them build an MVP using forks and things that are pretty low cost, just so we can start testing the waters and getting some users in. But once that is done, then I would really be thinking about my marketing strategy and my distribution, right? Because it's not enough just to waste all my time and energy in building the best product. I have to get it in front of people. If I don't get it in front of people, then I'm going to waste a lot of time, energy, and money. But the other part, and this goes back to the value in this space of venture capital investing, is if I don't have my marketing strategy, if I don't have my communication all clarified, if I don't have the problem spelled out, I don't know how much money I need to raise. I don't know how much money I need to spend in marketing. I don't have a data room that spells all this out. Your ability to get VC investing is going to be dramatically less, right? Because why is that the case? Because I know many founders today that are amazing at pitching. They have all their messaging clarified. They have data rooms. So you contrast this with someone who's prepared or ill-prepared. This is what I really see. So the point before you start raising money, you should really have a lot of this figured out in that data room with budgets, with projections, with things for investors to get into. Because that's often the most important step, is not just the concept, the idea, the MVP, and maybe an initial small community, but to start getting that funding in, you need a lot more than that. And that's where these other details will play in. I would do that before you spend any significant portion of money. If you're going to spend just a couple grand here or there to start testing some waters and bring people in and trying some things out and seeing what resonates with who as sort of a test and experiment, then it can make sense not to map all that out in advance because it's just some quick tests. But if you're going to do anything serious, professional, and you're going to put that in front of professionals, you really want to make sure your work is done right and it's all spelled out. And that's where that data room comes into play. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, actually, that is super useful. And it brings to mind something else that is a really interesting vein of, given that your other expertise is in tokenomics. Speaking of funding, when a company raises VC funding, the question has to be asked: who is the key stakeholder? Is it the user, or is it the investor? And how does someone balance that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So one of the most important things that I help founders do is sort of with that balance. And I'll just list out, let's just speak about why it gets out of balance. Okay. First of all, founders are just trying to sell their tokens. They don't really have a viable business model that an investor can say, you know what, I'm going to buy some equity and I'm also happy to get some tokens. Usually a lot of the business model revolves around tokens themselves explicitly. And that's where some challenges can exist. And that's the case with a lot of projects. The next challenge is then they take that value that they want to raise, that let's say it's $2 million they want to raise, and they're willing to part with 10% of their supply. Well, now you're already at a $20 million valuation before you've even raised any money. Now you need to be even higher. If you go from seed to private to public, you need to step that up and have multiples off this for ROI, because there's a level of risk in the beginning. So that's why you end up with a public valuation of $50 million fully diluted. And that's where you end up with these higher valuations. A lot of it springs off of pumping a lot of that money into a smaller token supply. So how I like to look at this is I really truthfully try and make sure that no VC investor allocation, seed, private, that should ideally be around 10% at max of the total supply. Okay. If it's more than that, you're taking on quite a bit of risk, because people, a smaller group of people hold your token, and they can dump that when that vests, and they can destroy you, and they will take profits. We understand that. When I look at community, I like to see my community have about double that. Okay, so I like to see a nice liquidity pool. I like to see a nice community or public allocation. That way, when the token is live, I can have a decent amount of the supply circulating. You know, ideally, if I can get between 30 and 50% circulating in the beginning, if I can get there, I know that over the next 2-3 years, if I have a vesting schedule, I'm not going to get eaten alive by inflation. But this is what a lot of projects do, is they pump all this value into the token, and they end up with this high market cap, fully diluted, and then they sell a small bit to public, and then they launch that, and here's what they end up with, is a very small circulating market cap, but a very high fully diluted. The difference between these two is inflation. If the value of my tokens is, let's say, $200,000, and I've got 1% out here, and I look at when it's fully live on, let's say, the decentralized exchange, and my fully diluted valuation is 20 million, that's when all of it's out. That means 100 times more tokens are going to hit the market over the vesting schedule. And here's why this is so dangerous. Now, how much is actually going to be inside the liquidity pool on the decentralized exchange? Probably a very small amount. And when we link that to a lot of inflation, we link to volatility because we don't have many tokens on the DEX. What we actually create is volatility towards the upside. And this is why this becomes dangerous, is when that happens, it doesn't take as much money to pump a price. But if I have a lot of inflation, I'm actually inflating a lot more value onto the market. So the higher I pump my price, the more tokens are valued coming onto the market, the more selling pressure I have, the more I get destroyed. And this is essentially what I see so many of these economics people like doing their tokenomics this way, all for venture capital raising, not for the community, lots of inflation. The project then has all this money it wants the market with, but guess what? The better job it does with marketing, the more value of those tokens being dumped on them, and they get absolutely eaten alive by selling pressure, right? Or incentives or rewards or airdrops, or whatever the case might be. That's essentially like wraps up a big part of that kind of mix around the health of these tokens, investing schedules, and venture capital investments. That's kind of the root cause of a lot of these problems, in my opinion.
I think that's so true. I think there's a broader... I have this love of meta points. I always see a thing, and what's the broader point? I'm kind of a sucker for that, but I think there's a broader point here where just throwing resources at things is never the solution. And it manifests itself in so many ways. You brought up earlier about, well, okay, you don't throw money at these things until you've figured out the strategy, the avatar, and so on, you test it. I made actually just the other day, like 2 or 3 days ago, I put a post on LinkedIn about how just throwing headcount at things isn't the solution. Classic case of C. I had a client like this. Hey, let's bring on a BD guy. They didn't know what the outcome was. They didn't know how to do BD, so they had no way to measure the process or know what success should look like. They didn't really know what they wanted in terms of outcomes. Everything was quite vague, and none of the founders, and there was no one on the leadership team who had expertise in that. So they bring a mid-level BD guy on because that's what they wanted to do. It never kind of worked out. They just sort of trudged along because he didn't know what he was doing, because nobody knew the parameters for success. He wasn't a senior leadership guy, so it's not like he could come in and build the system, and that wasn't his expertise. It's not his job to figure it out. In the end, they ended up blaming him for not working out, but it was their fault because it's not his job to set the strategy and the process. It's your job. And then once you've done that, you hire, and you've proven that it works, then you hire someone in to run it. And I think it's the same thing with deploying marketing spend. Or classic case, you can see it with crypto projects that raise way too much money. Nothing ever happens with them. I think it's an iron law of EOS, IOTA. IOTA still employs something like 100 people last time I checked. They hire people. Wow. What do they do? I have no idea. But it's almost like these projects become jobs programs. And they don't actually do anything, but they got to spend the money somehow, and everyone's going to have a laugh. And I see it with venture funding as well. Actually, I spoke to someone recently. I was interviewing him, previous founder, different industry years ago, but he pointed out that he bootstrapped a software startup, and they innate creativity, that their direct sales model wasn't working. They pivoted to a channel model, and suddenly they blew up. He said to me, I'm glad that we didn't raise money, because if we've raised money, I would have burned $10 million in venture money trying to brute force the direct sales model, and it wouldn't have worked. But we couldn't do that because we didn't have the resources. So then I figured out a way to work, and then boom. And I think if you look at this process of getting the marketing right, you can't just come in, oh, let's spend $1 million on that and see what happens. It's never going to work. I even made a similar mistake myself, and I should know better when I scaled up my company before. I thought, oh, we need this. Let's just hire someone to do that. And I had, junior, mid-level people to do things that I hadn't figured out how to do myself. So now I'm going to be hiring again later this year, but I'm sitting here mapping out all my SOPs, proving all my processes, doing it all myself. And then next time when I hire somebody, like, here, do this. I know it works. And I think you can apply that across every single discipline and every single way of spending.
That's, what you just hit on something. This goes back to kind of like a focus on operations. Like a passion for operations is, it's the same thing in your marketing spend or whatever the case might be, or in anything in business. The people can't see on my wall right now, but I have a poster of Dr. Deming on here, and he has a great quote that says, "A bad system will beat a good person every time." And that seems to be what you just highlighted here. Is there is no system. There's a lack of a system. Now you bring someone in, they can't do the job effectively, and then you blame them. And the same thing is often what I see in this space when it comes to CMOs and people in marketing. They bring someone in because maybe they have we have a picture of themselves with CZ or someone. Hey, I'm a CEO now because I know CZ or, Vitalik. This is a picture of us. Now, see how good of a CEO I am? Well, wait a minute here. What metrics do you actually measure? How do you know you're a great CEO? If you're a marketing person, tell me what metrics you measure. I don't care your KOL network or whatever the case might be, because that's short-term success. Once hype fades and the fundamentals have to take shape and actually work, this goes back to metrics measured. How do you spend money? How do you make sure it's working? Do you double down on things? Do you eliminate what's not working? And then do you double down? Like, how do you actually know what to scale up? How do you know what to scale back? What are the measurables along these ways? Like, this is the case for almost every single position. When you think about it, there should be some measurables to those positions, and this is also like a pretty important point that I just wanted to highlight that you mentioned here. Not only on the hiring side, but in looking at your marketing and your personnel. One thing that a mentor of mine actually implemented that I found was pretty smart is he had, with his team, it's easy to get caught up in metrics, but he actually had them list out 3 metrics, 1 for each category, and then he challenged them to improve it. So what this could look like is you have 1 metric for quality. You have 1 metric for speed. That's 2, right? You have 1 metric for value. That's 3. The person defines those 3 they want to measure and improve. The person comes up with the experiments they want to run to try and improve those variables. The person reports on the success or failures of those experiments. And again, the person didn't fail. The experiment is what failed, right? And through this simple approach, that's what I've seen also be highly effective. So if you're a founder, maybe you got a whole team underneath you, and you can't even think about how to get metrics going, and maybe that's what you need as a first step, you could start with just a couple. And you could start with having the person recommend the metrics. And that also tells you if they know what they're talking about. Like for what Harrison noted earlier, if I'm a marketing person, I'm going to measure my community growth as my primary metric, but I'm not actually looking at buying volume as a metric. If that's what I want to grow is actual utility buying volume. I'm not looking at volume on the decentralized exchange if I have a live token. I'm not measuring the right metric, right? Because I just want to bring in buying volume. I can bring in 10 people that might spend a lot of money in buying and selling this token and create volume. Or I could bring in 100 people that aren't going to do any of that. Am I actually creating value? Or am I wasting a bunch of money, right? And so this is anyway, I just wanted to highlight the importance around metrics and systems as it might even relate to a variety of roles that exist within the project,
100%. I find the best teams that you can tell when you talk to them they're going to be successful or not. This is something else I made a post about recently, but like I say to people, if you're evaluating taking a job in a project, what is the job? Is it and I think the wording that I used as every job in the organization should be either building, improving, or operating a system. If that's not the case, that's a red flag for me, because unless you're coming in at that leadership level to put those systems in place and they're amenable to that, they're probably setting you up for failure. What does success look like? What is the process to achieve success? I'm not saying it can't work, but it's risky. And they'd be much better if they did have those systems in place.
Yeah, I got to ask you something that links to this. What's your thought process on the initial team composition of a project as well? Like I had one that I even responded to your post, a client that brought in 20 people that were all part-time. He even modified his garage so he could accommodate all these people. And I looked at it, they're all part-time. A lot of them were being paid peanuts, and some of them were even volunteers. And I'm like, that will never work. You'll have to manage all these people. You'll get nothing done. Really, you should put your time into getting one amazing A player that has a multifaceted amount of skill sets, and then you bring them into the team and you incentivize them some way, shape, or form. And now you get a lot more performance. You don't even have to manage them ideally. So how have you, this is what I'm curious about as well, because this links back to every role we have in a project. How have you seen kind of the A player composition, like actually in the early stages, especially, because I feel like this is something my audience would also be very interested in.
That's a really great question. I'd say I've got two answers to this question. One is about the founding team itself, and then the next answer is about after that. I would say I'm guessing you're going to nod your head in agreement because you've probably made the same observation. But ideally, I think every founding team has one visionary and one operator or integrator, whatever you want to call them. You see it with Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. You see it with a lot of really compelling companies in and outside of crypto. It's not that it can't work if you don't have those two complementary skill sets. I don't have an operator. I'm naturally the visionary, so I'm kind of playing at being the operator because I know it's important. It's not my natural strength. I would definitely be in a better position if I had a COO. I can tell you that. But I definitely see that is really important. I think it's more important than the combination of technical and non-technical founder. But that is another distinction that can be really helpful. I think if you have both of those things covered, you're really set up for success there. Once you start actually hiring the initial team, in my opinion, hiring at early stage startups needs to be very different than hiring at a mature company, because you can get so much leverage out of having exactly the right people. And that's especially true compared to in the past. And when I started recruiting, say 15 years ago, nearly 20 years ago now, you come from sort of print shops. My first industry was industrial automation. So I used to hire territory sales reps for big industrial automation companies like Siemens and Rockwell and ABB. And the interesting thing about that is if you really look at that job, if you look at the outcome of the job, i.e. sales figures, who's responsible for the results? I'd say at least 50% of it is the company and its infrastructure. It's the brand, it's the products, it's the huge capital investment you need to make to be able to even play in that space. It means there's a tiny amount of competitors. Most people will buy largely based on the brand and the product itself. So the salesperson, what difference does it make having an amazing salesperson or an okay salesperson? It matters, but maybe it makes 30 or 40% difference to the sales figures at the end of the year. So you can get by just fine having a team of entirely average or even below average salespeople. If you have an amazing team, maybe it's 30% better, and you probably pay 30, 40% more for them. But in an information age company where all the knowledge and information value is up here, that calculus is completely breaks. The difference between an average person and an exceptional person in, say, crypto BD could be infinite. There's no way to calculate it. It's so large. But the amazing person might cost you 30% more, but they'll deliver you results that are thousands of percent better. So to me, what I see with the best teams is they're not, and you see this especially in DeFi. DeFi is known for lean teams. They will not intend to build a team of 50 people. It's, hey, we need 3 to 5 or maybe 7 or 9 people who are absolutely exceptional at what they do. We've really crystallized exactly what outcomes we want from that person, what the process is going to be, where their unique contribution is. We've considered how that fits in with the unique strengths of the rest of the team, and we're covering the weaknesses as well. I'm not going to say definitively what those jobs should be. It's going to depend on every situation and the existing composition. But the point is that so much thought has gone into who that person is and what they're going to be doing. And you might spend, entire recruiting process well north of 100 hours for every hire that is brought in, but you make sure it's exactly the right hire. And that small team can massively outperform a large team of average people, whilst keeping runway. So, you don't get all these complexity problems that happen when you scale up an organization either. And once you get to sort of Series B, C, and beyond, that system breaks because you can't be spending 100 to 200 hours for every hire if you need to hire 200 people. It's just not feasible. But by that point, you've got this infrastructure for success that the early hires have laid. So I sense I'm starting to ramble a little bit, but I hope that's helpful. That's how I see it.
No, No, I understand exactly what you're saying. I think it makes the most logical sense. Obviously when you're small, you don't want to have a bunch of people to manage either. That's also an important piece of this. So you need to be able to find and put the time into finding the right people. That way they can develop people not only beneath themselves, but they will actually deliver what they're hired to do without a whole lot of management, leadership, and training. Because that also eats you alive once you bring on new people, obviously. This is what I experienced personally too, is in the early stages when we had our project, we had quite a few people in our team. I think I had around 15 or to 20 people. Okay. Now, after the initial success of the project, we had some people that made a lot of money, they left or whatever. We didn't replace them. When I looked at our output, actually our output increased because the people that left, 2, 3 would leave. I'd bring in one more that was amazing that I was able to find. And I was actually able to get more results for less people with less management, less headache, right? But obviously that was significantly easier to run a project that way than to have a whole bunch of people underneath me that weren't really specialists, that needed constant guidance, motivation, training. And often in this space, it becomes quite challenging. A lot of times you're hiring people in and you're trying your best to train them. You're all remote. You're not in person, different time zones. You get all this stuff working against you. And with all these variables, you better be damn sure you're bringing in someone really phenomenal, especially the early stages. So I can definitely relate to this. I've made the mistakes in the other direction as well, even knowing better, just trying my best to grow and trying to say, hey, I need help in this area. I can't do it all myself. And I need somebody, please. Somebody, will you show your head? I'll hire you. I need it, right? I've done that. I've regretted it, especially in this space, it becomes even more complicated, of an issue. So, yeah.
100%. And then the other danger is that even if you get all those things exactly right, the average tenure in crypto is about 9 months. What I would challenge people to do is, and this is a more detailed topic that I think we don't have time to really get into how you do this now, but you need to be having a system that's going to maximize the chances of retaining that person for a lot longer. If you can double the industry's average retention, you can go from say 9 months to 18. It's still not long by the standards of other industries and other periods of time, but it's a substantial improvement, because if you only have someone for 9 months, no matter how good they are, by the time they're making an impact, they're already leaving. You're incurring all these switching and costs and hiring costs and so on. It's a disaster. If you can keep people for 18 months, 2 years, even 3 years, it makes such an enormous difference to the trajectory of your project at that early and critical time.
Yeah, and you hit on a good point. I do have a little bit more time, but when it comes to sort of the read my calendar wrong. So when it comes to sort of the obviously bring someone in early stage as well is in that 9 month. What I found in this space too is a lot of people are leaving the bad management is what I've seen too. There's a lot of founders for the first time that aren't really that great of leaders, to be honest with you. They haven't found out how to lead. Maybe they're a little bit younger in their career even. And so this leadership, if you really, from my standpoint, if you really want people to stay, then you have to become a great leader. They're leaving because they don't see the opportunity. They're leaving because the leadership they don't believe in. They're leaving because they don't believe in the product that the leadership built. They would not leave and go to another project or whatever if it had the same opportunity, if they didn't see, that they were on kind of a sinking ship. And that's what I also believe is the case a lot of times in this space, is there's a lot of projects that launched, they find initial success and they struggle to sustain that success, and maybe they did a lot of marketing that's hype orientated and that's why they got destroyed. You see a lot of this as well. And also the bear market conditions. But at the end of the day, if you have the right people and they're really believing in what you're building and you've done your homework to bring in the right person and you build those relationships the right way, then people will actually stick around in kind of the harder times and they'll push through the harder times. And I think that also is why you see a lot of the churn is unrealistic expectations, which are impossible to meet. There's letdown. People say, this isn't what I thought it would be. This isn't what I was promised. I thought I was going to the moon. Instead, I'm going down to the ground. I'm out of here, right? Let me go to the next one that looks like it might go to the moon. That's why I think you see this job hopping and people moving is really for that standpoint. I feel like unrealistic expectations, unrealistic promises is also a big part of this as well. And I feel like you need people, especially if you're going to keep around, people are financially driven, but people who are only financially driven, people who really want to build some amazing things, who really want to kind of work through the thick and thin. And this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of actually suffering through that bear market, those bear market survivors, the people who didn't just jump ship. Those are probably going to be some really good people that will kind of work their way through some problems as they exist especially when times aren't the best. And that will happen in this market. There's always a bear market that pops up. It always comes back, That's also like, if you really want people to stick around, you want to find people who have actually been through that kind of stuff before, who aren't as scared by it, So
I think that's really insightful. My last point that I'm going to make on this is to tie this all up in a pretty big loop. Counterintuitively, I actually think employee retention is, more than anything else, it's a marketing problem. And people see the point that they leave, oh, what did we do wrong? A lot of the time, the thing that you did wrong was before you even hired the person, because you didn't ensure that the person you were hiring really was, what you want is that person's values and ambitions and problems that they have with their current role or situation. You want those all to be aligned with what you can offer and the problem you can solve for them, and to keep that alignment. If you keep that alignment, the chances are they're not going to leave. And people in crypto take it for granted that people just move around a lot, like it's a fact of nature. But it isn't. If you make sure to line these things up from the very beginning, the same way as, if you acquire a user for your project, if it's just because they can make some quick money on a listing, they're not going to stick around. It's not sticky. Cardano, you can say whatever you want about Cardano. They're brilliant at building a cult. There's a lesson to be learned in that. That's what I'll say about that.
Yeah, you must have seen my post from today.
I had an inkling.
Just that. Yeah, you'll see where I listed just like that. Yeah, and that's a great example of someone who's even asking, hey, how is Cardano actually sustained this long? They don't have much building activity, right? The development timelines are slow. Why are people still here? It's for the leadership. They believe in Charles. That's why they're here. They believe in the leadership and what's there. That's the core philosophy of what they're there. They're there for long term. They're not the people that are going to be looking around in 5 months and hoping that Cardano has this huge thing on there. Everyone's using it. They're long-term kind of base, right? From what I personally believe as well. So,
hey, and I can tell you, just similar reasons, I would imagine, Cardano has a lot of employees that stay there for years, literally years, 4, 5, 6 years. You just don't see that in most of crypto. I don't think it's an accident.
It's leadership. Yep, that's exactly right. The leadership, the philosophy, the belief. All this stuff is really important. So it was great to talk to you today about marketing, also team composition. We spent time, I think we laid out a good strategy for people to start thinking about their marketing, but also, of course, everything is going to be executed by a person, at least not AI just quite yet. Current state, it's going to be a person that executes, So I think we shared a lot of details on how to make sure we're bringing in not just the right people, but how we're actually targeting the right results and some strategies we can apply. So it's great to be with you here today, my friend, and great to have this conversation.
Tony, it's been an absolute pleasure. This has had a very, very strong signal to noise ratio as a conversation, so I'm sure the audience is going to appreciate it. Last thing for you is, if someone wants to get in contact with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn, Tony Drummond. So I have about 11,000 followers right now. I built up over the past couple of years. And I focus on topics specifically for Web3 founders. That's my core audience, just like it's yours. This point, Harrison, is just really trying to help people across marketing, tokenomics, communication, just sharing all the things I learned along the way. And I also love to highlight a failure. Just this past week, I highlighted how I gave out $10.5 million worth of incentives to our community with their own token. These are things that people obviously would kind of like want to hide behind. My philosophy is like, if we share this stuff openly, like after I did that, I had to go analyze the body and figure out, why did this happen? How do we not do this next time? And for my philosophy too, is it's like, this is what makes you a better thought leader, a better consultant, a better advisor for your client, is actually be able to highlight the things that you made mistakes around. Because a lot of the mentorship, as I see it in this space, needs to exist around mistake avoidance. It's not like we have 10 years of prior history we can go back to, right? So it's all a matter of finding people who have been there, done that, and that's a big part of what I do, whether it's tokenomics, and in the future, a new company, Convert, that's going to focus on branding and communication strategies so we could target the right person with the right message. That's the point of that new company, and explain the system in a way that people can actually understand what the hell you're actually building. Because I'll just tell you, founders, you go to your website, your white paper, nobody gets it. And that's the problem we seek to solve.
Thanks for tuning in. This is the Blockchain Startup Show, and we will see you soon.